Hey guys, Crypto Sunday, and it's a slightly red week for me. Not a huge amount, about 3,000 or 1%. We know that's not a huge move in crypto land. This is Bitcoin up and altcoins reasonably down for this week. You see why sort of the majority of people are still not very happy. Sort of being heavy altcoins. I remember sort of on TikTok seeing quite a lot of people who would sort of comment on videos and sort of say they're not doing too well, and you'd say, well, what's your portfolio? And they might say like, oh, I always go back to the same guy. He said I'm 70% in the graph, 20% Hedera or something, and then 10% like some meme coins. You think so? You've got nothing at all in the top 10, top 20 even. You know, it's just not gonna pan out too well unless you get extremely lucky. So, yeah, not a huge amount of news this week. Looking at the coin shares report, it was quite quiet. Sort of knew that was going to be the case. 286 million in inflows. This was almost entirely because of Ethereum. Saw a tiny net outflow for Bitcoin, but 321 million into Ethereum. 2.4 million out of the multi-asset continues to keep seeing small outflows. 1.5 million into Solana and 28 million out of XRP. I think that's second week in a row of stark difference. This was completely the other way for a long while. 2.2 into Sui, still getting a reasonable amount of inflows. It's nearly 1% of AUM in a week, or 0.7% of AUM. In a week, that's not the worst thing. A little bit into Cardano, a little bit out of short Bitcoin, which is interesting, I suppose. People are sort of taking their shorts off, but you never know why they're shorting in the first place. It's not necessarily that they think Bitcoin's crashing down tomorrow. A little bit into Chainlink and a little bit into others. By country, it's not a huge change. Hong Kong and Germany with inflows in this week. It's a little bit out of Switzerland. 21 million into Australia. It's over 10% of AUM. Quite interesting. Hong Kong is sort of 7%, 8% of AUM. So some reasonably big moves, I suppose. And in terms of this week, it is a net outflow week. We had 267 million out on Monday, including negative from BlackRock. A couple of reasonably small inflow days, I suppose. 375, not too bad. But what is that? Wednesday saw inflow into BlackRock, but quite a big outflow out from Fidelity. Fidelity sort of seem to be struggling to hold on to their customers at the moment, and now very very stark difference between them and BlackRock. BlackRock got over 4 times the inflows of the Fidelity fund. They were sort of tracking each other. BlackRock I think was about 50% more than Fidelity not so long ago, and now they're 4 times. So the BlackRock machine powers on. And then 2 days of outflows. The Thursday, zero from BlackRock, and then outflow across the board. Even, the old grayscale and new grayscale. And then Friday, interestingly, outflow from BlackRock and inflow across the board. So I don't know whether these two are linked, potentially, but there you go. So we're going to have an outflow on the coin shares report. Ethereum, quite interesting though. We had a couple of sort of outflows from Fidelity, but across the board, well, overall rather, we've seen a full week of inflows, and this is sort of 3 weeks in a row. I think maybe 4 weeks in a row. The sort of previous days track off here, but I think I saw a tweet that it was sort of 20 days in a row of inflow, which is pretty strong. Basically all going into BlackRock's Ethereum ETF. Obviously they're talking about staking, trying to include staking, and SEC don't seem all that all that keen, sort of delaying everything, delaying all the new ETF approvals, it seems. But yeah, maybe waiting for a sort of legislation, and they're trying to get in-kind deposits and withdrawals. So, people with Ethereum can just deposit their Ethereum with BlackRock, and they'll issue new shares of the ETF rather than them to sort of sell it and rebuy. It's just sort of friction, unnecessary friction. So yeah, Ethereum doing a little bit better. And the weekly micro strategy was quite a small buy, almost one of those days where they don't buy and he just says MicroStrategy still hold this amount. But they did buy 705 Bitcoin worth 75 million, 106,495. So yet again, another week of current price being slightly lower than his buy price, and yeah, yield whatever. 580,955, and their average price has ticked over 70,000. So that's a bit of a milestone, I suppose. I did mention yesterday the China mining ban, and this does appear to be fake news. Forbes have sort of put out an article saying they did not just ban Bitcoin again, and it sort of came originally from Binance, and I saw a few different news sites reporting this, and it seems to have been a sort of unfounded story that then, lots of other stories link to the Binance as reported by Binance, and if the Binance report was unfounded, then it sort of spreads and spreads, but is untrue. There's been nothing from, there's like a dozen Chinese sort of authorities and, departments of the government that would report on this, and no one's really said anything. So that might make sense of why the Bitcoin hash rate doesn't seem to have gone down at all. It reached new highs in the last week or so, I think. And yeah, I don't think, obviously China's mining capacity isn't as big as what it used to be, or, their share of the mining has dropped dramatically, which is probably quite good for the space. But yeah, they still have quite a bit, and I think if China had sort of come out again, and sort of reasserted their wanting to ban it, even though those people didn't really switch off back then. Some people may have switched off, and you might have seen a bit of a drop. But yeah, if this is fake news, that sort of does seem to make sense. Whether they sort of, whether they were banning holding it and buying it and everything, and not just mining, that would have had maybe a bit more of an impact on price. But yeah, if this is sort of completely fabricated, then maybe a little bit shame on Binance for sort of reporting without checking first, or potentially even nefariously just wanting to spread a rumour. So speaking of miners, I do still think it's a good idea to keep an eye on Coreweave stock, since we're sort of waiting on an AI deal for some of the miners at least. And yeah, Coreweave still seem to be smashing it, to be honest. 20.21% in the last 5 days. Obviously still, way up on the month. They did have a spike on Wednesday to sort of 163, more than that I think in intraday, and sort of pulled back, but it's still 20%. Well, actually, yeah, 163, 164 looks like it was the high, but they're at 67 billion now, and I suppose a few billion in, as a deal over sort of 10, 15 years, as they seem to be doing, wouldn't exactly make a huge amount of difference. I haven't looked. I need to look into their sort of financials and see actually how much revenue they're doing, as to how much of a deal they could be putting out. But obviously this is rapidly growing. So looking at sort of last year's, even last quarter's earnings and revenue isn't going to mean a huge amount to sort of next year, as when these deals would be going ahead. But yeah, certainly market cap going up would indicate there's plenty of demand. At this sort of market cap, they could issue a few billion of new shares, I would have thought, relatively easily, and put the proceeds of that into a new deal. So just increase market cap, even if they're not getting the revenue, could provide a huge boost. That's kind of what Tesla did sort of back in the day. when price rocketed way beyond the fundamentals, and they were at sort of 700 odd billion market cap, and sort of basically saying, well, why don't we just issue 10 billion in stock and use that if we're not making a profit. So yeah, higher market cap can just magically do wonders for the company. Like, of course, Circle. So we had Circle, the founders of USDC, launch IPO on Thursday, and they IPO'd at $31, I think it was. And in 2 days, they went to $107.70. Even went to sort of 121 on partway through the Friday, sort of came back slightly, but then they're up to 115 in after hours. Obviously, it's been 2 days, so you can't exactly take a huge amount from this price action, but yeah, $21.6 billion. There was talk sort of literally like a month ago about Ripple buying them for $6 billion, so I'm guessing they're happy that they didn't go for that deal. They had to delay their IPO, I think, last year or a couple of years ago because of sort of poor market action, poor IPO action in general, not just in crypto. And yeah, they've finally sort of come out the gates, and it seems tremendous demand for stablecoins. Whether people are sort of just wanting to get into the space and there aren't any public companies that are solely focused on stablecoins, so there's just huge demand, or people are thinking if the stablecoin bill goes through, then this market could 10x or more. So USDC has about 55 billion, I think. Obviously Tether has like 140 billion, so I don't know what that makes Tether worth, considering Tether keep all of their profit and or all of their revenue from the treasuries at least, and Circle still have to give quite a large portion of their income to Coinbase. So yeah, this is potentially a relatively high valuation. Tether sort of make 4%, 5% on 140 billion worth of treasuries and just keep it all and buy Bitcoin with it and invest in companies. So Circle, obviously the only publicly listed company people are wanting in. So yeah, potentially money going into this that could be going into crypto itself, but I suppose it highlights the space, and there seems to be plenty of demand for this at least. Maybe it flows through into the space in general. So we've got a few more companies on the BitcoinTreasuries.net. I do think from looking at it, some of these sort of new additions, aren't necessarily buying right now. This is sort of they bought a while ago and they're, now happy to announce that they own. So this going up sort of doesn't necessarily mean, dozens of companies every week are getting into Bitcoin. Some of these may have gone in sort of 6 months ago and just rather not disclose it. And you also get sort of companies reporting Q1 results, Q1 earnings for sort of the end of March. Some companies take very long time to report that. You could get over the next sort of 3 or 4 months companies still reporting sort of Q1 results. They just take a while to, and sort of some of the UK companies especially, a lot of these new companies reporting are sort of 20 Bitcoin or less, market caps, 100 million or less, some in sort of double figures, so they're penny stocks, and take an awful long while to report. So this could be just sort of 6 months ago we bought a little bit and now we're announcing our earnings, but it's still growing, and 225 sort of entities does look good for the space, and hopefully makes more people want to hold it on their treasury. I do kind of agree with Scott Melker's take on this, that I would rather we got more companies allocating some of their cash on their balance sheet to Bitcoin rather than sort of being MicroStrategy, copycats, competitors, whatever we want to call them, and just sort of raising debt to buy Bitcoin. Some of these companies are, a sort of 10 million market cap company, and they sort of say they're raising 500 million to buy Bitcoin, and that's sort of gonna just very quickly make your original business completely irrelevant. to sort of the point that strategies is now. The software business underlying it is basically irrelevant. And if you raise 50 times your market cap to buy Bitcoin, then again, your whatever existing company you had is just going to be completely irrelevant in terms of revenue and profits. If the Bitcoin on your balance sheet is going to go up and down, you have to report that, it seems now, as net profit, or everyone's going to. So yeah, you just become a small MicroStrategy competitor, basically. Still keeping an eye on Helium Mobile. Helium sort of Internet of Things stuff as well. They don't sort of seem to give the same stats for their Internet of Things side. But yeah, the mobile side certainly seems to be doing really well. Just hit a new high on daily users. We kind of expected more daily users because they have bought the free tier out. They're expecting sort of this free tier to be, lots of people sign up, quite like it, and they might then move on to a paid tier. But yeah, you sort of see, I think it was here, around April time, they released this free tier, and new sign-ups absolutely rocketed up. It's 165,000, now 284,000 in sort of just 2 months. Got a load of new hotspots sort of around then as well, slightly before then, so nice. But the daily users, touching over 1 million now, and the daily transfer volume, so sort of offloading data from Verizon and AT&T when it's difficult for them, and sort of being a partner network, I do think is, sounds a lucrative business, and is, real world usage rather than just speculation on crypto. So the sort of deep in physical infrastructure stuff on which everyone still says is sort of only possible on Solana. I don't really believe that. There's lots of other chains that could probably handle the speed. Maybe don't have the capacity to, but they certainly have the potential to be able to run this if they sort of expanded capacity a little bit. But yeah, good to see it on Solana for now at least. I did just have a quick look on DeFi Llama. There wasn't really too much to make note of apart from Solana TVL. Not really sure. Sort of couldn't really indicate sort of what this was. There was looking at 7-day change in TVL. There was some sort of reasonably big increases. I think Camino is sort of quite a large one. They did 2 million of fees in the last 7 days, so it could be them. But yeah, for whatever reason, we're sort of at 120 million SOL in total value locked, and it sort of rose up to about 125 earlier in the week, and then suddenly in 1 day went up nearly 10 million, and is now sort of sitting 15 million above a couple of weeks ago. So that is rather a lot, $20.46 billion. But I do like to look at it in SOL terms, as I always say. If price doubles and no one's actually done anything, then yes, TVL will double, but that isn't sort of signifying increased usage in the chain. That's just price going up. So looking at it in SOL terms means people are doing something, in the last week, and sort of adding, 10% of over 10% of total value locked in SOL terms in the last 2 weeks. So for whatever reason, that is decent. And I do keep having a play around with this global liquidity indicator. This is sort of just global M2, and it does include. So this doesn't include things like the Fed balance sheet. This is just M2 money supply from all of the countries, all the way down to sort of emerging markets, Argentina, Saudi Arabia, and people like that. The other one sort of had less of the smaller countries, but more of the sort of Fed balance sheet, the China balance sheet, and that sort of thing. But yeah, this one does seem to sort of certainly, go up and down reasonably close to the Bitcoin price. And certainly the correlation got a hell of a lot tighter in sort of 2024, basically, which was around the time of the the Bitcoin ETFs. So I wonder if that has had an impact, bringing it more into the sort of TradFi world. And so this is the one lagged by, or leading by 12 weeks rather. So whatever you see happening, this spike sort of here, for example, in early 2024, you could say that this huge rise was helped on by sort of global M2 increasing, because obviously this, global M2 increasing, this looks like at the same time that the Bitcoin ETF craze happened and Bitcoin went up. But of course, this low point here was 12 weeks before the ETFs launched. So, yeah, it's does certainly seem to be very, very tightly correlated. And of course, we're here at the moment at sort of 105,000 in at the 6th of June, and this sort of leading, when you sort of don't zoom out, when you zoom in a little bit more, it loses a little bit of the correlation. But certainly looking on here, this goes right to the end of August, and it's sort of projecting if we stick tight to it, a rise to 160, 170,000. Obviously, like I say, if you go back, it's hardly a tight correlation, but it would be interesting to see if this holds and that sort of theory comes to pass, that it's got a lot tighter because of the ETFs and sort of more moving into the TradFi world. But yeah, I thought that was quite interesting. So the portfolio, as I say, has been a little bit of a mixed bag. Bitcoin up about 1% this week. Solana down 3%, and that has sort of, I think, caused some of the rest to go down as well. Ethereum up 0.12%, so still sort of fairly stable. Chainlink down 1%. Helium down 7.5%, even though the sort of usage at an all-time high. Gito up 11.2%. Radium underperformer for the week, 14.8% down, not very good. Metaplex down 3.7%, and Honey down 1%. So yeah, no sort of huge moves, and it does lead to a very small move overall. But yeah, we'll have to see. A lot of people are sort of making very, very bold predictions and saying we're going to have a huge summer, and certainly doesn't seem to have happened just yet. We had Arthur Hayes, I think, sort of back in mid to late May, sort of saying by early to mid July we were going to be at sort of $150,000 to $200,000 Bitcoin. I always sort of thought that seems a little bit crazy, and here we are, sort of first week in June, and we haven't moved at all. So yeah, that does seem a little bit optimistic, but I don't know, maybe by sort of late August, as the M2 is suggesting. We'll have to see. So leave your thoughts in comments below, and like and subscribe. See you soon.